Hey everyone, hope you're all doing good. Just think I'll take this time out to do a little bit of update on the Run Against Suffering campaign. It is now day 3. I've just finished my third run, and at this point I've now clocked up 16 miles. So I am now over a tenth of the way through. So I'm on good course to get these 150 miles in over the course of this month. And today I also had some text printed on some t-shirts of mine. So as I'm out running, passing people by, they can read what I'm doing here. They can read about the scale of suffering which goes on to these animals. And yeah, I'm going to be wearing these out to my local park runs, and so people can actually take the time out to read it, and maybe we can have some discussions about it and see what people think, see if they can actually justify this. Yeah, so it's now day 3 for me now, and for the past few days, for some reason my knees have been hurting quite a lot, and now this isn't particularly usual for me. Since being on a plant-based diet, my running has been so much better, my recovery has been so much better, so it's quite unusual for me to be dealing with this kind of niggly issues. So yeah, my knees have been hurting quite a bit just throughout the day, etc. But let's put this into perspective, right? I might be putting myself through this, feeling a bit of pain here and there, but so many animals every year, every month, every day, every minute are being put into this abusive system by us. They're not going into this for their own free will. This is what we are doing to them. And this involves pigs being lowered into gas chambers where they literally suffocate to death. They're being starved of oxygen and they scream out because it is so painful. We're talking about cows being bolt gunned in the head. We're talking about day-old male chicks, because they are economically useless in our system. They're being chucked into macerators where they are ground up alive, at a day old. So, I'm taking my small pain into perspective and saying, what are these animals going through? So let's keep that perspective in mind and think about all of these animal victims who go through so much torture, so much abuse, and so much suffering. And let's appreciate our privilege to be human beings. If we were another species like cows or pigs or chickens, simply because we are a member of that species, we are fed into this abusive system, this exploitation, and we are killed at a fraction of our natural lifespan simply because we were born one species and not another. So it is now day 6 of the Run Against Suffering campaign, and I've just come back from a run today, my 6th run, and I have now clocked 31 miles. So that is now 1/5 the target total of 150 miles. So I'm keeping up the good pace, and yet racking up the miles, and just holding out until the long run. I want to take this opportunity today to read an article which was published by the BBC just a couple of days ago, and it's a very important article, I believe, because it provides an account of a former slaughterhouse worker, and it goes into detail about the harrowing experience which they faced every day, and it just highlights that not only are animals going through so much suffering because of our demand for meat, but the people who are having to take on those jobs to kill these animals are also suffering from it. like slaughterhouse workers are more likely to develop mental health conditions like PTSD and depression. A lot of them become suicidal or they become alcoholics because of it. So it just highlights that not only are animals suffering from this, but human beings are suffering too. And so we should be keeping them in mind as well. But yeah, I'll be reading from this article. Some of it is quite harrowing. It does go into depth about the specifics of animal slaughter, and it does mention suicide and mental health struggles, just to bear that in mind. The subheading of this article says, about 100 million animals are killed for meat in the UK every month, but very little is heard about the people doing the killing. Here, one former abattoir worker described her job and the effect it had on her mental health. And it continues from there. Whether they eat meat or not, most people in the UK have never been inside an abattoir, and for good reason. They are filthy, dirty places. There's animal feces on the floor. You see and smell the guts, and the walls are covered in blood. And the smell, it hits you like a wall when you first enter, and then hangs thick in the air around you. The odour of dying animals surrounds you like a vapour. As I spent day after day in that large, windowless box, my chest felt increasingly heavy and the grey fog descended over me. At night, my mind would taunt me with nightmares, replaying some of the horrors I'd witnessed throughout the day. One skill that you master whilst working at an abattoir is disassociation. You learn to become numb to death and to suffering. Instead of thinking about cows as entire beings, you separate them into their saleable, edible body parts. It doesn't just make the job easier, it's necessary for survival. There are things, though, that have the power to shatter the numbness. For me, it was the heads. At the end of the slaughter line, there was a huge skip, and it was filled with hundreds of cows' heads. Each one of them had been flayed, with all of the saleable flesh removed, but one thing was still attached: their eyeballs. Whenever I walked past that skip, I couldn't help but feel like I had hundreds of pairs of eyes watching me. Some of them were accusing, knowing that I'd participated in their death. Others seemed to be pleading, as if there was some way I could go back in time and save them. It was disgusting, terrifying and heartbreaking. All at the same time, it made me feel guilty. The first time I saw those heads, it took all of my strength not to vomit. Abattoir work has been linked to multiple mental health problems. One researcher uses their term perpetrator-induced traumatic syndrome to refer to symptoms of PTSD suffered by slaughterhouse workers. I personally suffered from depression, a condition exacerbated by the long hours, the relentless work, and being surrounded by death. After a while, I started feeling suicidal. A few years into my time at the abattoir, a colleague started making flippant comments about not being here in 6 months. Everyone would laugh it off. He was a bit of a joker, so people assumed he was taking the mick, saying he'd have a new job or something. But it made me feel really uneasy. I took him into a side room and asked him what he meant, and he broke down. He admitted that he was plagued by suicidal thoughts, that he didn't feel like he could cope anymore, and that he needed help, but he begged me not to tell our bosses. I was able to get treatment from his GP, and in helping him, I realised I needed to help myself too. I felt like the horrific things I was seeing had clouded my thinking, and I was in a full-blown state of depression. It felt like a big step, but I needed to get it out there. A few months after leaving, I heard from one of my former colleagues. He told me that a man who'd worked with us, whose job was to flay the carcasses, had killed himself. Sometimes I recall my days at the Slaughterhouse. I think about my former colleagues working relentlessly, as though they were treading water in a vast ocean with dry land completely out of sight. I remember my colleagues who didn't survive. And at night, when I close my eyes and try to sleep, I still sometimes see hundreds of pairs of eyeballs staring back at me. Obviously, this article is a very tough one to read. The content of it is very harrowing, and it highlights just how horrific this industry is. And these are jobs which are being demanded by the consumer, right? So, the more demand we have for meat, the more people have to take on jobs like this, put themselves through conditions like these, and suffer from it. People are killing themselves because of this. So not only is abstaining from animal products a compassionate thing to do for the animals who suffer, but it's a compassionate thing to do for workers. Like, we can transition our industries away from slaughterhouses, and we can develop more plant crops where people don't have to kill living beings to make food. Now let's just imagine how much nicer that would be for the people to work on. And this is something that I feel very strongly about. Like, not only do I believe that veganism equates to animal flourishing, but it equates to human flourishing, because we don't have to put people in these positions where they have to kill living animals and obviously being scarred by that process. We're not having to do this to these people. Instead, we can grow plants. So not only should we be vegan for the animals, we should be vegan for the workers, for the human beings, for the people who should not be put in conditions like these, have to face mental health conditions because of the work that they have to carry out. Nobody wants to be killing animals every day of their lives. So why don't we stop demanding animal products? Stop demanding these animals to be killed on our behalf.